is Jay Dardenne, who is the Commissioner of Administration for the state of Louisiana, and he's joining us right now here in the Ringside Hotline. And Commissioner Dardenne, how you doing? Good morning.
Doing good, Jeff. How you doing?
Hey, fantastic. Well, welcome back. It's been a while, and how are you transitioning into your new position? How do you like it?
Well, it has been a while. It's good to be with you. Well, it's a real challenge for us. I'm enjoying it. I'm kind of back in the thick of things here, trying to deal with this budget situation, and we've got a real challenge on our hands. We're paying for 8 years of fiscal mismanagement, and there's no way around that. I mean, this governor stepped into a real mess, and we've been here about 6 weeks or a little, I guess, or so, and we've got a multi-million dollar challenge on our hands.
Well, it seems like we were right, you were right, I was right, calling out Bobby Jindal for all those years and all that mismanagement and all the distractions he was involved in and the one-time money and the hocus pocus budgeting and everything else. And now, of course, there's a disaster we're dealing with. But I do remember during the campaign, and tell me if I'm wrong, Jay, but if I'm not mistaken, I thought you were the only one to say, hey, we might need to raise taxes. And in a debate, I don't recall John Bel Edwards and the other candidates saying that. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Well, I remember one particular debate where we were asked to raise our hands if we thought we should consider raising taxes, and I was the only one who raised my hand.
Right, I remember that, yeah.
Everything needed to be on the table. I think in fairness, during the course of the campaign, virtually everybody, I think all four of us at some point acknowledged that we were going to have to do something. Nobody wanted to say the T word, but the truth of the matter was I think everybody realized no matter who had won this race, we'd all be in the same situation. That one thing is for certain. Things would not have been better had David won or had Scott won or had I won. And so we all would have stepped into exactly what John Bell has stepped into and had to fix this problem. And I don't know how all of the four would have gone about it.
Right.
We're going about it in a way that is being truthful with the people. And sometimes the truth hurts, but we're being honest and forthcoming about how we got here and what the breadth and depth of the problem is. And frankly, nobody is challenging the numbers in terms of where we are and how much of a shortfall we have. There's obviously a lot of discussion and disagreement on what we do to address it, but the reality is, based upon what the constitutional body, the Revenue Estimating Conference, tells us, we had a decline in revenue for the current fiscal year of $570 million.
Wow.
That has to be addressed before June 30th.
Now, here's what I'm worried about. And we're visiting with former Louisiana Lieutenant Governor, candidate for governor, Commissioner of Administration, Jay Dardenne. I'm worried about the fact that and it looks like the sales taxes are going through. There's a difference as far as whether it'll be a year and a half or 5 years. And I would bet that there's going to be some kind of compromise, maybe a 3-year extension there for the sales tax. That would put us at the highest sales tax in the nation. And that worries me as far as Louisiana attracting people to the state, businesses to the state. Obviously, that's not a good thing, right?
No, it's not. It ought to worry you. It worries me. It worries the governor. I think it worries all of us who are dealing with this because the sales tax is not the tax of choice, frankly, that we need in Louisiana. It does put us at the highest, and it impedes local government's ability to deal with their own problems when one of their only main sources of revenue can be a sales tax. But keep in mind, this is being proposed as a bridge. We have continually referred to it as a bridge because the aim of the game here is to structurally reform our tax code, and there is legislation pending in the special session that would make dramatic changes in the way we tax in Louisiana, specifically in the income tax, that would provide an opportunity for this tax to be that bridge. And I think you're right, somewhere between 18 months and 5 years, and we're having some discussions now about keying it to alternate income being available so that it would roll off at some point, either based upon a certain time or based upon raising some revenue to offset it. This is not intended to be long term, but it also, we're saying we don't want this to be temporary either, where it's voted on every 18 months.
Right, exactly.
Every 2 years. That's what got us in the soup a couple of decades ago, and we finally changed that. And the rating agencies don't want to see another temporary fix. They want to see Louisiana structurally change its budget.
And I'd also like to see, and this, of course, isn't going to help us in the short term, but long term, that we look at what's going on in other states that maybe we can emulate here. It seems to me, and I looked at various studies, Jay Dardenne, that we've got more state employees per capita than other southern states. We spend more per capita than other southern states. We've got more colleges and universities than other southern states, more than Florida. So I would think there'd be some ways we can consolidate and save money as far as our spending. I know that's not going to help us short term, but don't we need to be looking at some of those reforms?
Well, sure, and it is going to help us short term. I mean, the governor has proposed a significant amount of cuts in the current fiscal year. I mean, we have already proposed, and the legislature's already adopted about $60 million in cuts. The governor's proposed about another 30. Plus, we're proposing not to fund items that the previous governor and previous legislature had said could be funded in this current fiscal year. In other words, we're not going to fund areas, for example, in the TOPS program and other shortfalls, Medicaid, the Office of Juvenile Justice, and others, corrections. Those are equivalent to cuts because that money has been authorized to be spent, but it is not going to be spent. So spending is a big part of what we're doing to try and reduce our spending. One point on the number of universities, because this is something that people talk about a lot.
Right.
It's correct that Florida has less four-year universities than Louisiana does, but it has a huge number more of two-year universities that offer two-year degrees or some kind of alternative education opportunity post-secondary. So they have developed an educational scheme that did not rely on as many four-year schools as we did. If we were starting from scratch, we would not have as many four-year schools in this state, frankly. I think anybody who looks at it would probably have a smaller number, but the reality is we have the number that we have. But you're correct, spending changes or a reform or a big part of this, and we're going to continue to ratchet down government. The one thing I will say about the general administration, they got rid of a lot of state employees, primarily because of the closure of the charity hospital system.
Right.
But state employees in Louisiana have dropped significantly, and we're not going to go start ratcheting up growth in state employees. We're going to continue the downward trend and be responsible in our budgeting practices, but we also have to be honest and realistic about where we are, and unfortunately we're learning that was not the case for the past 8 years, and particularly the past 4 years.
But I would say this, we also need to look at the legislators. I mean, they were partners in all that with the governor, weren't they? Couldn't they have done more to say, hey, we can't continue down this road?
Well, sure. I mean, there are a lot of folks who agreed to the budgets that have been passed and agreed to and really accepted representations made by the governor that were less than candid in terms of our spending cuts. But so some of them obviously are still part of the system now, but they understand, I think, and I hope, and they're starting to understand even more that they've got to do some things to right the ship and to balance things. I mean, we're spending a lot of time talking about the problem in the current fiscal year, which is huge. It's almost $1 billion that we have to address between now and June 30th. But the looming monster
$2 billion
is the fiscal year 17 budget, which has to be approved before June 30th, and which has a $2 billion plus.
All right, so
right now.
So we're looking at the reason we got in this hole. Of course, I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, oil prices dropped. We had practices where we were using one-time money for recurring expenses. And then
$800 million in the current budget. That's right, $800 million in one-time money in the current budget.
I mean, that's just incredible. And then, of course, as you said, there were also revenue dropped in a lot of other areas. So I guess we had less than we expected in corporate income taxes and personal income taxes.
Particularly corporate. I mean, we have a negative corporate income tax receipts for the current fiscal year. Now, let me explain that. Corporations filing tax returns have claimed more in credits than they've paid into the state coffers. So instead of a revenue projection in the positive, obviously, for corporate income tax, which you would expect to help balance your budget, we're in the negative. We've actually given out more credits than we've taken in money. That ought to tell you that we have a major structural problem with the way we do things.
Here's what I'd like to see if we could lower the corporate income tax rates, and get rid of all these special deals and exemptions we have for certain industries, but lower the overall rate to make us more attractive to maybe recruit business here.
It makes sense, doesn't it? We're with you. That's exactly what the governor's proposing during this session. We're proposing to lower to a single rate the corporate income tax rates in Louisiana. Right now we have staggered rates, and the high is 8%, which is the highest in the South.
Right.
We're proposing to lower that to a single number, perhaps 5, 5.5, 6, something like that, but also lower individual tax rates. change the brackets, lower the rates, do away with a number of the exemptions and deductions that are available to both individuals and corporations to make our tax code easier and simpler to understand and much, much more stable. We have so many hundreds of exemptions and deductions and credits that are sprinkled throughout our tax law that it is very deceiving as to how we tax in Louisiana, and we ought to have a simple system that's going to create stability. What we need more than anything right now is stability in our budget and then structural change for the long term.
I'd also love to see, Jay, the corporate franchise tax done away with, because I think we're one of only 16 states to have that.
We are, and it ought to be done away with, frankly. That's not on the table right now to do away with it because we simply are trying to dig ourselves out of this hole right now. So long term, we ought not have a corporate franchise tax. Long term, we should not have an inventory tax. But those are major components of our tax system right now. We've got to take some baby steps to get to the point where we can wean ourselves off of these taxes that are really disincentives to business.
I agree. And the things that I think are something that the public would support would be maybe some of these sin taxes, alcohol and cigarette tax hikes, maybe to bring us more in line with our southern neighbors. And seems like that is being held up right now. Where does that stand?
It is. It is not. It's not moving yet, but it is a part of the governor's package, and we're hoping that we'll see some movement on both the alcohol tax and the cigarette tax. It certainly is not an onerous burden. And it's about a penny a beer is what it comes to. It's not a huge increase, but it's a part of the plan to try and piece together revenue sources that'll help us get out of this terrible problem. I mean, for all the problems we're screaming about and people are concerned about right now in the short term, we've got to also think long term and recognize that come July 1, we've got to have a balanced budget in place, and we've got to make certain we continue to provide educational services, healthcare services, and the basic needs of government, not in an exorbitant way, but in a responsible way.
And the last time alcohol taxes were raised was 1948. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct.
So they must have a powerful lobby. Is that
they have for a number of years, and we really are not trying to overreach in this aspect. It's just trying to make us competitive with our southern neighbors.
And as far as cigarette taxes, we have raised those in recent years, correct?
Raised it last year, and there's a proposal to raise it a little bit more this year, and that bill has not moved with the speed that it needs to yet in the process. We're down to about a week, a little more than a week left in the session, but not surprisingly, a lot of the action, of course, will take place as we draw to a close here. So the next 7 days are going to be pretty frantic around here.
Any final predictions you want to leave with us, Jay Dardenne, as far as what's going to happen here in these final days of the session and where we stand?
I'm certainly hopeful that legislators will realize the severity of the problem and exercise their responsibility to make sure we have a balanced budget. The governor has made a series of proposals that get us to where we need to be, and hopefully the legislature is going to string along. I think you will see some additional revenue measures passed. We're continuing to look at ways that we can reduce the budget, and we'll have to if there's not enough revenue passed. And I'm certainly hopeful that we'll also turn our attention to next year's budget. Because that's going to be on us pretty quickly. One thing we can't do and shouldn't do is resort to deficit spending, to just basically say we're going to push this year's problem into next year's problem, because that just exacerbates that problem, and it's not responsible, and in my view, it's not the constitutional thing to do either.
Before I let you go, TOPS, a lot of questions about the future of that program, about what it's going to mean for students that are already on those scholarships at LSU, or those incoming freshmen next year that are seniors that are planning on utilizing TOPS. I've got a son in that category. So what's going on with that program?
Well, TOPS, the shortfall in TOPS that exists in the current year is going to be borne by the universities. They're going to have to eat the final TOPS payment, which is about $28 million that is still owed for the current fiscal year. That's going to be borne by the universities, not the students or the parents. Next year's TOPS situation, frankly, Jeff, is up in the air, depending upon what happens with the budget. You're looking at a $2 billion problem, literally, for next fiscal year. And so TOPS is one of the things that we want to fund, and we want to make sure it continues. It's a great program. The governor is 100% behind it. But the reality is right now we've got a $2 billion challenge on our hands, and the legislature is going to have to figure out how we deal with that that problem.
So that's not going to be really dealt with until the regular session?
Revenue measures cannot be dealt with during the revenue session, so it needs to be addressed in the current special session, or else you will see a second special session after the regular session.
Okay. Wow. Well, we hope to have you back on regularly, and Commissioner of Administration J.